Welcome to the Irish NFL show. We are previewing the week 7 games. There's 13 in all. 6 teams, of course, on byes this week. The Panthers, Texans, Cowboys, Titans, Jets, and Bengals. Highlights among the Sunday games include Detroit at Baltimore and the Chargers at Kansas City. Those are indeed the 2 live games being screened this Sunday at Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. Buskers also screens Red Zone live every Sunday, every NFL Sunday. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars visit the New Orleans Saints on Thursday night/Friday morning. Brian and Andrew preview that game in our Thursday night football podcast, which you can get on any podcast platform. Now, our first section of game previews and picks is brought to you by RuPoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. You can see how RuPoint can help your business at rupoint.com. Well, on with the first segment of our Week 7 games and our Week 7 picks. And we have the Falcons and the Bucks, Brian, to start. 2 teams coming off a loss and looking to bounce back. Who gets the W and gets their mojo going again?
2 teams that are coming off very different performances offensively. Bearing in mind the struggles of Desmond Ridder in the game last week with the 3 interceptions, they still had a total offensive performance of over 400 yards and held Commanders in check for less than 200 yards and somehow came out the wrong side of the result in terms of losing the game. And then you look at the flip side of the Bucks, and the Bucks struggled to do, didn't do a lot really throughout the course of the game. Now, we could argue you could put that down to a really strong Lions defense, and we've touched on it, on Tuesday around kind of one of the leading things for that Lions team right now is more so how well the defense is playing. But Baker Mayfield struggled against the defense last weekend that could get at him, and I feel the Falcons defense can get at him. And I'm reading so many various different articles and kind of previews of this game, and so many people are selecting the Bucks to win as if it's a given. I think you look at it pound for pound in terms of who has the better players, both offensively and defensively. It's the Falcons, and I think Arthur Smith will be ruined that game last weekend, and expecting Bijan and various other players to step up in this game. And I don't think it's as foregone a conclusion as many think. I'm going to side with the Falcons in this one. I think the Falcons, for me, are the better team. Okay, they've had some struggles, in particular games, and Ritter will need to play really well. But I'm going to go with the Falcons to go into Tampa and get the win.
Colin, either of these 2 teams could yet make the playoffs, and arguably one of them very well might. The way the way the division is going, nobody's running away with it. It's as we've called out since the start of the season, and even since before the season started, one of the weaker divisions, which also means it's all to play for. And these divisional games are quite exciting. Then, as a result, do you accord with Brian? Then, do the Falcons have enough to take it from your perspective?
Firstly, I think it's good that we're leading with this game, given that Brian is wearing his creamsicle tribute shirt, and the lighting makes it look that he's a beautiful tan, as if he has been spending the week there in Tampa Bay. Apologies to anyone who is listening to this on the podcast. Do try to get on to Twitter or YouTube to check out Brian's shirt. It looks like something I'd wear.
I can come back in on that if you don't mind. 2 things. One, I'm a week late for the Bucks on the in the legacy kit, which they wore last week against the Lions, and I thought I'd blend in with Real Point. Obviously, you are supporting the show. I thought their colours are kind of unique, and I thought it would fit in well with my top for the season. There you go.
On message and on brand. What a pro.
For this game, Connor, do you remember the episode of the Simpsons where there's the kind of messianic society, and then Homer ends up being
Stonecutters? Who could forget the Stonecutters?
And the wonderful Stonecutters song, and the Stonecutters had everything set in place only for Homer to ruin it all. Well, that is the Atlanta Falcons. Everything is set up. The defense is playing much better than expected. The offense has so many pieces. Desmond Ridder is Homer, the stonecutter, and that is a huge issue. He is a huge issue. Arthur Smith, he always emotes on the sideline, right? We have always seen that. But last week was taking it to a new level. And I think that's the issue. Like everything, they looked at it last week and they should have won that game, but they don't win the game because of Desmond Ridder. And I can see why, it could fit into place, but I think this Bucks defense is decent. I do think they are going to cause the Falcons problems, and for that reason, I'll go Bucks.
Yeah, I'm going to say, looking at this Falcons team right at the start of the season, I thought they were going to be a fun watch and entertaining watch, which they have been, but they've also been very frustrating offensively because of Ritter and because, despite the playmakers that he has around him and the scheming of Smith, it doesn't always come together, and he's often let them down. I do think they've gotten. We wondered how many of these new role players on the defensive side would actually slot in and what they'd get from the free agents. And they have got a little pop there. We talked about it on the show on Tuesday about how defenses are still on top, even heading into week 7. And to me, I think the Falcons are surprisingly better on that side of the ball than I expected them to be. I do think they've been close to pulling out W's in a couple of those games, as you mentioned, where they've actually lost. I think the Bucks probably have. They were really showing up, frankly, for the last game for me. I think the Baker Mayfield honeymoon is over, and I actually fancy the Falcons to nick this one on the road. So I'm going to put me down for a Falcons win as well for the Dirty Birds.
The buck stops with the Ritter. Is that where we're going?
Hey. Now the buck stops with Belichick in New England, and the Bills visit Foxborough this weekend. In the bargain basement right now, Colin, they can't do anything right, it seems, offensively. They've been pulling Mac Jones the last couple of weeks for Bailey Zappi to save him from himself and to save them from an even worse skid than has already been the case. The Bills, on the other hand, have a lot of injuries to contend with, and that's a recurring theme at this stage of the season for a lot of, even for the contenders at the moment. Is this one that Patriots, do you think, can use to get on track, as it would be a real morale boosting win against a divisional opponent, or if the Bills just got way too much for them?
Well, the Bills are, this is a team that put the absolute beat down on the Dolphins, but the injuries that they had in London have really taken a toll. I think Matt Milano was the heartbeat of that defense, and I think you saw what his loss can do. The good news is that they aren't going to have to worry about that against a Patriots offense that is flatlining. Do you remember this is what, given the Bills are the only real New York team, this is the city of New York versus Homer Simpson. Do you remember that episode? Homer goes and everything continues to go wrong and he gets more and more frustrated. That is Bill Belichick this season. Nothing is going right. The car is getting clamped. And today we have Albert Breer saying that Robert Kraft is, there is chatter in the building about moving on from Bill Belichick. My goodness me, how things change, I just don't see the Patriots. Could they, with their backs against the wall, get a win? Yeah, sure, anything is possible in the NFL, but they've had huge injuries on defense. The offense isn't going anywhere. They look, redundant. I think that's the right word. He keeps bringing people back in, right? He brought Bill O'Brien back in instead of trying to get new ideas. And I think Bill was once the great innovator. He was willing to continually evolve. He's moved away from that. And I think that is one of the big issues. And it might be that, everything is so set in stone in New England, he can't move on. But no, the Bills should have enough, and Josh Allen should have enough to win them this game.
Yeah, I got to say, I'd kind of row in behind that. I really thought that the Patriots would pull something out against the Raiders. Like, it was all set up for them, the student, the master over the student, rather, with the Belichick-McDaniels matchup, and that didn't materialize. It's just very difficult to see where they pull this one out from, albeit that the Bills are injury depleted. I mean, it's funny, we talked about how much the Bills might benefit from getting Von Miller back. When he comes back and everyone else is injured. They just can't catch a break there, the way that whole dynamic has gone. But I just don't see the Patriots' path to winning games at the moment. I just don't see where it's going to come from offensively. I think, with the role players that they've lost on defense, that leaves them a lot more exposed than they were earlier on the season when you thought, oof, they actually did a pretty good job against the Eagles, and oof, they held the Dolphins down. Before we saw that 70-point explosion, like they look quite impressive, but this team is just not set up to succeed in today's NFL. To your point, Colin, Belichick hasn't moved on; he's moved back, and that one step back certainly hasn't enabled them to take 2 steps forward. They're pretty much where they were last year, and that's not good as far as this weekend is concerned. Brian,
the Bills' injuries are on defense, because they're not on offense. They're not missing anybody in offense, and they've started in the past. Well, we've played 8 quarters, and I wouldn't even say they performed in the 4th quarter last week. They got 2 touchdowns. They performed reasonably well in the second half in England, but first half they didn't do anything. And the 3 quarters last Sunday night, they didn't even score. Yeah, they've got injuries on defense, but they're not doing a lot offensively at the moment. They'll be fine here, to be honest, because I picked the Raiders last week, which is on the Patriots situation. I wouldn't say it's a complete mess, but it's certainly spiraling out of control. I thought they would have been competitive enough to be winning games, and we've seen in the past, even despite poor seasons, that they find ways to win tough games in the division, and they hang with these teams and they navigate victories. But right now, you just can't see where it's going to come from. I think the Bills will be fine in this game. I think the Bills will win comfortably, but I don't think the Bills. It's amazing how quickly the NFL evolves and changes. 3 weeks ago, going to London, we were talking about the Bills coming off a 48-point beat down of the Dolphins, and we were saying this team we had Phoebe Schechter from Sky Sports on, and she was saying, right now they're the number 1 team in the AFC. You'd probably argue now that's not the case now. 3 weeks later, quickly how it changes. But in this instance, this game, I would expect them to win this game comfortably. Patriots lose another one. Don't like the Belichick stories, though. We've seen what happened when Fergie walked away. United haven't won the league since. I don't think the Patriots are going to be back in the sweepstakes anytime soon. The Patriots are going to find a way to find a new coach, only to realise 2 or 3 years down the line they should have held on to Bill and given him another crack at it. I think it's unfair for Bill should walk away when he wants to walk away.
Yeah, Browns at Colts is next up. One of Belichick's former teams, of course, which we've almost forgotten in the midst of time, and they haven't really looked as good as they do now since he was in charge, really. And that Browns defense absolutely fearsome. But when I think of the Browns, Brian, I think of something you just mentioned there about the Bills and how we've seen a lot of teams this season, including Buffalo, fail to back up a big win. We saw it last weekend, 49ers having smashed the Cowboys 42-10, go down to that Browns team. We saw the Dolphins put up 70, Colin, against your Broncos, and then fall flat the following week. And there's been lots of that going on this season. And you wonder, after that statement win by the Browns, are they going to be able to back it up against Indianapolis? I have to say, I suspect they probably will. I don't think that's as tough an assignment as it might have been, given the form that the Colts showed earlier this season. They still look like they've got plenty about them. Really like what Shane Steichen has done this season. They got Jonathan Taylor back. Zach Moss has been playing out of his mind. He's been doing great stuff for them. Obviously the constant Gardner isn't the worst choice to have at backup QB now that it looks like Anthony Richardson is going to be down for the season. But that's just a mean Cleveland defense. Myles Garrett just looks like he's having ghoulish fun out there at the moment as we approach Halloween. We know how much Myles Garrett loves Halloween, and he had that tombstone fixture in his front garden a while back where he had the names of every quarterback he'd sacked, and he could rack up quite a lot of tombstones this year if he wanted to. It's Cleveland all the way for me. Colin, what do you reckon?
Yeah, this is, I suppose, when you consider the Browns' defense, it is the tree shop of horrors from the Simpsons, because there are monsters on that defense, and the Grim Reaper reference I think is perfect for Myles Garrett. But what they did to the 49ers was really impressive. And I suppose what Jim Schwartz has done is he's come in and he's looked at the players. He's kind of done in some ways what Kyle Shanahan has done with the 49ers in terms of looking at the players, what are they best at, and let's lean into that. It's not really about the scheme. It's very different from the Vic Fangio defense as such.
Actual coaching, by the sounds of it, Colin, isn't that what you're supposed to do?
Well, everyone, people, I suppose, approach things differently. Some people have big schemes that they're going to implement, and they're going to get players to look to work within that. It doesn't really matter about the particular skill set. But I think it was really interesting for anyone who hasn't heard it. Kevin Clark had a great discussion with Dominic Foxworth on his podcast during the week, I suppose, about the evolution of the game. And I was talking to Carmen Vitali actually just before this, and she kind of built on that, and that'll be out the weekend. But basically what Dominic was saying was, Shanahan, say with Debo, right? If you play Debo purely as a wide receiver, he'd be fine, but he wouldn't be outstanding. Whereas Shanahan looked at it and said, there's things that you do well at wide receiver, there's things that you do well as a running back. Let's use you as a hybrid, and all of a sudden you're fantastic. Similarly to Christian McCaffrey, and that's what Jim Schwartz, I suppose, has done. He's looked at the way to best utilize, and that's why you're seeing Myles Garrett line up in interesting ways. My one concern for the Browns is the injury list. The injury report is pretty lengthy. They could be missing quite a few, and having to go into Indianapolis. But it is, again, like, I think the Colts will undoubtedly be a little bit deflated. Because Anthony Richardson is confirmed out for the season. Now, I am delighted to see them doing the right thing. This is a franchise who, did not do the right thing with Andrew Luck. We know that. And Jim Irsay, for all his faults, is doing the right thing in this instance. Perhaps, I'm imagining, can you imagine Jim Irsay as maybe Krang, as one of the giant aliens? I'm going to ultimately say that I think the Colts will make this feisty. But Deshaun Watson was practicing today from what I saw. That's trending in the right direction. If he plays, I think the Browns win. If it's PJ Walker, I think the Colts are capable of beating them at home.
Are we too down on Indy, Brian? Is it got to be the Cleveland show, or do you see a different result?
I think I wouldn't throw the Browns into that category of coming off an ecstatic victory like we've touched on there, initially as we previewed this game around other teams that had these big wins, and the energy levels are so sapping that they come back in the following week. They're so flat, because offensively they really did struggle last weekend. I think we called out today 12-27, 42% strike rate. There was nothing to, and you could call out some of the kind of marquee plays that they made to get down the field. So I still think they'd be delighted with the victory. I think they still know there's a lot to work on. Like, I think Deshaun Watson coming back would be a huge plus for him. Yeah, as Colm said, he's practiced today. I think even with PJ Walker to win, but I think he'll win more so because defense will be able to guard them Minshew down over the course of 4 quarters, and they'll do enough offensively. If Deshaun Watson's playing, I think it'll be a bit more comprehensive. But I'm siding with the Browns. I think this is a huge game. Like, bearing in mind the Ravens won last weekend, the Ravens are playing the Lions. I think you need to follow up that victory with another victory, and I think they do get it on Sunday.
Brian, we'll keep you on the clock for Raiders Bears up next. I know the Bengals are who dey nation, but there'll be a lot of people looking at this game going who dey when they see the quarterbacks who show up. We've got Aidan O'Connell taking on Tyson Bagent, an undrafted free agent in a quarterback for the Bears with the Justin Fields injury. I'm just glad, for the sake of football fandom, that this is not a primetime game, because it doesn't look like it's going to be too spicy. But who do you think is going to take it?
I think the interesting storyline going into this one is the Devontae Adams storyline. I don't know if anybody's had the opportunity to read that today, but he's been very outspoken this week around the disappointment in terms of how many players are being sent in his direction. And then Tashan Reid, who we had on the show previously, Colin would remember, a very good beat writer for the Raiders, put out a piece today, really kind of decisive in his comments around what Devontae Adams' expectation, and he doubled down on that message on X, and he basically said, "Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I'm not getting the ball enough. I'm not satisfied with the play." So there's an undercurrent still there with the Raiders, despite getting back to 500. In this game, unfortunately for you, Connor, I think it's another one of those wishy-washy games for the Bears offensively, and I think the Raiders will find a way to navigate a 4-3 record come Sunday evening, which is probably beyond their expectations a couple of weeks ago. I think Aidan O'Connell, Colin touched on it a couple of weeks ago, how he was kind of thrown to the wolves by the head coach, but he seems like a guy who has the right head and the shoulders. He played well when he came in last week, and he's an O'Connell with 5 brothers and the Olive Irish name, so I imagine there's some kind of Irish heritage there. So we'd have to back the O'Connell with me and go with the Raiders. So for me, the Soldiers on Sunday will be the Bears, unfortunately, the Raiders to victory. Raiders to win.
Colm, I hate to say this about my own team, but I hope you learned your lesson when you picked the Bears last week. What way do you see this one turning out?
Yeah, well, if Fields had stayed healthy, But that's the if. Ultimately, for both of these teams, though, I think this is Marge versus the monorail, because both of these teams were sold a pup. The Raiders, they sit in 3-3, but they've beaten 3 bad teams. Like Brian has highlighted, the Adams is basically begging to get out of there. He does not want to be there. The head coach threw the QB under the bus. None of it looks sustainable, other than the fact that their schedule looks absolutely winnable. And yes, they should 100% win this. If they don't win this, I would say, again, it's going to heap pressure back on to Josh McDaniels. For the Bears, I spoke to Carmen a lot about this. She obviously covers the NFC North, and she thinks that ultimately the ownership don't like to blow things up. So she doesn't think it's going to be a kind of a Control-Alt-Delete type scenario, no matter what happens. But it's difficult to see like what is working really for the Bears. Yes, the young QB came in last week and he did okay, but when you come in and there's no tape on you and the defense hasn't prepared, this will be very different this week. The Raiders should have enough, but I think I agree with Brian. I think the story here is, does Davante Adams get moved before the trade deadline?
Yeah, you got, as you've alluded to there, Colin, Raiders have, over the next 5 games, they include the Dolphins, the Lions, and the Chiefs. So this is a win they really got to have. They knotted up their record at 3-3, with that fairly facile win over the Patriots in the end. They don't have an awful lot of soft touches left on the schedule. So this is one that nudges them over 500. And, Josh McDaniels will want this one desperately, because it's one of the keys to saving his job before the end of the season. Yeah, it's interesting what you say. I think penny for Ryan Poles' thoughts at this point, right? Because I think both he and Eberflus get a pass for last season. It's not their quarterback, not their regime. They're starting the rebuild. They're starting the teardown last year. This year's year one of the rebuild. And in a funny way, Fields going down probably suits Matt Eberflus more, because it kind of gives him a semi-pass this year, although things have not looked good. The play calling has not been good. I mean, last week for me as a Bears fan was hugely, hugely disappointing and dispiriting, in that you have a team coming off a mini bye with 11 days to prepare for the Vikings, who seem to have no clue about what Brian Flores would cook up to try and prevent them doing what they had done the previous 2 weeks against the Broncos and the Commanders. Blitz heavy, took DJ Moore out of the game, and the Bears, they didn't have a plan B, and plan A didn't look great to begin with. And similar didn't do too badly on the defensive side of the ball, to be fair to them, but against an injury depleted Vikings who didn't have Justin Jefferson, it's going all kinds of wrong for so many reasons in Chicago at the moment, and I don't think it gets any better this weekend. Even with Aidan O'Connell in at QB for the Raiders, I think sadly from a Chicago point of view, they will take this one. Right, that's where we leave it for the first part of our Week 3 preview, brought to you by RuPoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. Find out more at rupoint.com. Now we're into segment 2 of our Week 7 preview, and Lions at Ravens, one of the games to watch this weekend, and one of the games, of course, that's on in Buskers on the Ball in Temple Bar in Dublin. Well worth checking out if you're in the vicinity. You can also check out Kansas City in the other game, and the Red Zone on screens for anybody who's wanting to follow the witching hour and wanting to follow the action. Red Zone play by Red Zone play. Brian, Ravens, we managed to see them in person in London last weekend. A lot to admire in some senses. A kind of a funny game, but ultimately a fairly decisive win for them against the Titans in the end. Lamar's looking really good, really carrying this team at the moment. Zay Flowers looks like an exciting wide receiver, but the running game has not been where they would want it to be, apart from Lamar himself, who's picking up over 5 yards a clip. The Lions don't allow even the great running teams to run. That's going to be something that they'll really want to watch this weekend. In Baltimore, is there any chance of them slowing down that Lions team? In some ways you'd argue that they maybe have the weapons to do it, but whatever way you look at it, I think this is going to be a pretty titanic battle. It's
probably the most difficult game of the weekend, January, to pick from. You look at both arguments. You various different reasons as to why both teams will win. You're right. Well, we saw Lamar. I just felt we saw a different Lamar last weekend. Over the course of the more patient Lamar. Like, how many times did you call her out, to me during the game that they were the type of players where he got out in the perimeter, he'd normally run. Over the course, he just let off and go. But he seems to have, brought a new patience to his game, waiting for the wide receivers to get open. And I suppose it's evident by what we saw with, say, Flowers last weekend and other players that he does have more players around him at his disposal that he can get the ball to. And like other players that have come in that are kind of floating under the radar, like Aguilar, the big play in the first half. They've got the weapons, but I still didn't think they put it together for four quarters. Like, I think we were sitting down at half-time last week, but this game is over. And then they struggled early on in the second half. They had the interception with Murphy bunting and allowed the Titans to come back into it. And you'd worry about that, where they don't put 4 quarters together. And the Lions right now are feasting on teams. But it really is a tricky one. To me, it's more about whose defense comes out on top, because just on it, the Lions defense is playing so well. Can they slow Lamar down, as opposed to whether the Ravens defense can slow the Lions down? I'm going to go with the Ravens. I think just the Lions are on a great. It's a great story. They're clearly going to be the team that wins this division. And we spoke last week around, was that game in Tampa the kind of marquee game they needed to kind of prove that they're legit? This is another one, and these games are going to come thick and fast. And I think it's a close one. I can see this come down to a field goal. I'll go with Justin Tucker to find it to be the game-winning field goal, tight game. Ravens just about come out on top.
Yeah, interesting, and maybe there's an element of recency bias because we have just seen them in the flesh. But I thought I was going to be the outlier in picking the Ravens here. I thought we'd end up going Lions across the board, and I'd be justifying going in the other direction. I actually think the Ravens might just squeak this out. They have a very good record against the Lions. I know this is a different Lions team, but in recent matchups, Ravens have definitely held the edge. They have a fairly decisive win-loss record against them. I think the Lions have been running really smoothly and it's been going really well. The pattern of this season, though, is that just when you start thinking that a team is making that run, they kind of come off the rails. This is a really tricky game for them. I do think the Ravens will just about edge it, but I'm fascinated to see what way it unfolds. Colm, how's it going for you?
This, to me, I suppose this is an interesting one because think about Sideshow Bob and the Rakes, okay? And how many years was that the Lions, right? Where they constantly found new ways to walk into a rake and to end up with, being their own worst enemy. But I think the tables have turned. That is the Ravens this year. Brian has alluded to it there. They've gotten away with it occasionally. It's cost them at other times. The Ravens could be, if it hadn't been for their own errors, they could be unbeaten. And in some ways they deserve to. But this Lions team, I think they have a really special group, and I think they have a special bond with their coaching staff. And I think Dan Campbell has done a great job. He is not the meathead, and he likes to play that up in the media, but the players, the way in which they respond to him, they go out and they perform for him. And I think that you saw last year, Aaron Rodgers, people kind of knew, it was going to be the last game in Green Bay. There was huge amounts of pressure. Pat McAfee had built it up all week. He was going to love it, when the Packers were going to beat the Lions. And the Lions went in, they dealt with the pressure. I think they can deal with the pressure. And I'm going to be the odd one out. I'm going to say the Lions can go into Baltimore and they can win.
All right, we got Commanders and Giants up next. A classic divisional clash. Giants have definitely had the edge in the fixture. I'll go first on this one and say this is a toss-up for me. It's a game the Giants really absolutely have to win. Otherwise, the season kind of is pretty much lost. Things haven't looked right in New York, Brian, like not only on the field, but off the field. Like there's just a pall hanging over Brian Daboll when you look at him. The Commanders, on the other hand, while they've been volatile, there hasn't been any lack of effort. They very much look like they're playing for Ron Rivera and Eric Bieniemy and that staff. When Sam Howell looks good, he looks quite good indeed and can get things going. That front four they have defensively doesn't quite compensate for everything else they have defensively, but it at least gives them a shot. And I'm going to pick Washington to squeak this one out on the road. Brian, over to you, your beloved Giants.
I think this game comes down to which offensive line can hold up the most, because the Commanders have the worst offensive line in the league, despite the Giants' struggles. They're actually second last in terms of sacks. So 34 sacks for the Commanders, 33 for the Giants. So we're going to go into a game which looks again like it's going to be Tyrod Taylor. And I've looked at the numbers of the Commanders' defense. They gave up 400 yards last weekend, offensively under 200. Like, they're no great shakes on defense either. Yeah, they've got a strong front seven, but haven't really put it together. But yet they found ways to get over the line, and that's, for me, because I said that on the show last week, strikes me in a way as like the Giants last year. They're playing for this coaching staff. I'll be a bit more enthusiastic as a Giants fan after last weekend's performance. I think it wasn't for certain idiotic plays at the end of the first half and poor refereeing at the end, where for some reason you're not allowed to throw 2 flags in a row on 2 plays. I think the Giants would have got out of Buffalo with a win. And if they had got over the line, it'd be a very different narrative this week. I'm gonna side with you, Connor, and this I'm gonna go with the Commanders. I think they got the players offensively to trouble this Giants defense. Giants defense has played quite well last week. I'm still one game. I need to see it from a few more games. The turnover battle they've won over the past 2 weeks. If they win the turnover battle on Sunday, I think they will win the game. But it strikes me as a game that it'll come down nip and tuck to the fourth quarter. I think Commanders find a way to get over the line and move to 4-3.
Colin, as Brian said, to be fair, the Giants came pretty close to pulling that one out against the Bills, almost in spite of themselves, and particularly the offensive troubles that they've been having this season. Can they build on that and take down the Commanders this weekend?
I think they'd have a chance, or a better chance, if their medical staff wasn't led by Dr. Nick Riviera, because what is going on? It is absolutely ridiculous. They're literally pulling guys off the street. Like, if you go along to this game, bring some shoulder pads, because it is quite possible the Giants might invite you down from the stands to play across the offensive line. More guys going on IR this week. Things, I don't, things not right. It was interesting, I suppose, the non-handshake at the end between Dable and McDermott. That was quite interesting. I just think the Commanders, like the Giants, I think will get to Sam Howell, but I don't think they'll be able to score enough. I think the Commanders will be able to get enough points, but I do think after this game, Sam Howell will still be on course to break David Carr's sack record. So it's that is not sustainable. But in this game, they should have enough. I think is that the first one we've gone right across
looks that way. Yeah, looks that way. Can I throw in a cherry on the Dable McDermott storyline? I was reflecting on when Brian Dable's last game for Buffalo was, and in fact, it was that 13-second game, as we like to call it, in the playoffs. And in the last 2 minutes of that game, 2.5 minutes, the Bills scored 3 touchdowns, led by Brian Dable, offensive coordinator at the time, and Sean McDermott took over those play calling. Remember, defensively, I'll sort this out, Mr. Fraser. I'll figure this out, and of course, he loses the game, and obviously he walked away and became a head coach thereafter. I still wonder, does that game either way at him, because it got pulled up on one of the interviews before the season started by Boomer Esiason, and he quickly put Boomer in his place. But it was very evident the sting of that game still sits, and I wonder, is that one of the reasons? And there you go. Not relevant to the game itself, but however, keep an eye on that storyline. We mightn't have many more storylines for the season. We might need something.
Colin, the Cardinals travel to Seattle this weekend to face the Seahawks, who are off the back of a tough loss in Cincinnati last week in a very tight game. Cardinals have been pretty competitive all this season, and including again last week. Some of the bookies have this as a 7.5 point game, which I think is a little bit disrespectful to the Cardinals, I have to say. What do you reckon?
I think that's probably a testament to the Seahawks, where they're and to Pete Carroll and what they're doing now. I think the issue for the Seahawks has been the red zone. I mean, that's ultimately what cost them last week. And I know there was a lot of chatter I was listening to the Athletic podcast earlier this week, and I think it was Nate Tice was saying that he actually felt better about the Seahawks coming out of that game, even though they lost, than the Bengals. And I thought that was very, very interesting. But my worry with the Seahawks is that DK Metcalf appears to be auditioning for a role in Itchy and Scratchy because he finds new ways to get into fights every single week. And it is at some point it becomes an issue. I think given where the Seahawks are also playing, without their top two tackles, I think they have been impressive. Two frustrating losses. The Cards have been feisty. Divisional matchup, I think they will remain feisty. But at home, I expect this to be a Seahawks victory.
Yeah, I have to say, like you, Colin, and I'll pick up on that, the DK Metcalf point. It's not just that he's been a penalty machine. I think he's one of the most penalised offensive players in the league, which you expect if you're a lineman would be enough of a problem. But you shouldn't be getting hit with 15-yard penalties as a wide receiver. It's not just that; it's how unapologetic he was when confronted with it, saying, "I'm not going to change who I am." Like, why do you come out and make a dumb comment like that? Do you really want to attract any more refereeing attention, any more league attention? It's just not helpful to your team. Yeah, Pete Carroll loves a physical, aggressive guy who plays on the edge. As long as you're not playing over the edge and hurting your team with 15-yard unnecessary roughness and unsportsmanlike conduct penalties, like that's a momentum killer. That's a drive killer. And that's not what you need. Now, having said all that, I still think the Seahawks are going to win this one at the weekend. I think they're in good shape this season. They're, quietly building a decent bit of momentum in spite of that loss in Cincinnati. And I don't think Arizona I don't think it's going to be as far away as the bookies suggest. I think Cardinals probably going to cover there, but I think it's a Seattle win. Brian, what do you reckon?
I'll go against you on that, Connor. I think this is there's a guy in New York, and when he puts up his betting podcast, he refers to games where you're watching blowouts as the rocking chair game, and this is what this one is for me. I'll be rocking in my chair come the third quarter on this one with the Seahawks comfortably winning. I think this might be the last time we see Joshua Dobbs potentially, with the news that Kyler Murray has come off the IR. He's in the 21-day lead window now where he can be designated to play again, and he's back, putting up on social that he's back with the team, and I imagine they will look to get him back into the action sooner rather than later. So it'd be interesting to see. Look, if you look at the numbers over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks in particular, like the Cardinals, with the exception maybe that joins, or maybe the Cowboys game, I think before last week they were outscored in the second half 44-7. I mean, that's where we're getting to. So that was in the fourth quarter, but gradually over the course of the last few weeks, we're seeing they play well for, of course, 2 quarters, halftime. Then the team playing against them finds ways to pull away. But in this game, I think the Seahawks will be smart and disappointed after last week's loss, and I think they'll put all their energies into putting a bit of a marker down. So I think, unfortunately for the Cardinals, it'll be this Sunday out with the 12th man. I think this is a beatdown type of game.
All right, last game of the segment, Steelers at Rams. I'll kick this one off. Steelers have 2 wins on the board that they should just not have. I know your record is, as Bill Parcells famously said, you are what your record says you are. I think the Steelers are blessed to be sitting where they're sitting at the moment. They're winning games in spite of their offense, not because of it. They've pulled special teams plays out of the hat. They pulled big defensive plays from TJ Watt out of the hat that somehow managed to get them over the line and steal victories, in particular against the Ravens, where they were blessed, and against the Browns in a game they really probably should have lost, which they had a terrible fourth quarter, couldn't move the ball at all, and yet somehow miraculously managed to get the win. Now, Mike Tomlin off a bye, that's a dangerous proposition if you're the Rams, and not necessarily what you want to see coming into town. A fresh, hungry Steelers team with a point to prove and with a chip on their shoulder. If not now, when, you'd have to say. I still think, however, that the Rams are going well enough that I think LA takes this one. I think despite the absence of Kyron Williams, Kyron as they call him in LA. I think I've seen enough from the Rams that they should do what two other teams have notably failed to do this season, and find a way to put away the Steelers, because Steelers just can't score enough points. Brian, what do you think?
I'll go to the Steelers in this one. I think coming off the bye week, I think the stadium in particular on Sunday would be full of Steelers fans. It'd be more like a home game for the Steelers. And Matthew Stafford has to navigate against that, would probably be the deciding count for large parts of the game. And I think Williams, the running back, as you touched on there, being out is a huge loss for them. I mean, just sometimes you go into a season, that bright spot comes out of nowhere, and you become so reliant on him, and obviously they're very much reliant on the new wide receiver. And I think the Steelers just have this way of grinding down teams and just keeping in it and navigating late drives, and that's the type of game I see on Sunday. I think they'll just sneak a victory, find a way. Won't be pretty again, but defensively, I think we'll see a bit of a reaction. They had a really disappointing performance against the Texans last day. I think they'll slow the Rams down, have enough Steelers to get over the line. Won't be pretty.
Colin, it's up to you to break the tie then. Is it Pittsburgh or LA?
Well, I think last year, Sean McVay, and I think we're only really beginning to find out the exact extent of it now, came very close to what appears to have been a breakdown of as such. And like, it kind of was like Frank Grimes in Homer's Enemy, where everything had gone right, and then all of a sudden nothing was going right, and everything he tried to do, and the more he worked at it, the worse things got. And he certainly was a control freak. By all accounts, Jordan Rodriguez did a really excellent podcast series called The Play Callers, and she's kind of written a lot more about him this year. He's taken a new approach, and we've talked about a little bit about how revitalized he looks, but they're deliberately doing that, and he is being much more consultative with his assistants and looking around. And it's probably a little bit different to maybe Mike Tomlin and the Canada situation, because Mike Tomlin is a great coach, but Matt Canada should not be offensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He should not have come back. And if Mike Tomlin, realistically, if his ego allowed, Matt Canada would be fired, right? They would, but they won't do it. And the Rooneys are never going to force Tomlin's hand. And I think that is ultimately a disaster for a team, because we talk so much about McVay, but we forget that they have a brilliant DC. They really do. And I think he is capable of dealing with the Steelers. I don't think they'll be able to drag the Rams down into the mud. I'm going to say the Rams win.
Right, I was crying out for somebody to say blame Canada, but that's South Park rather than The Simpsons, so we won't go there. And that wraps up our second segment of the Week 7 preview. Right, we're in segment 3, looking ahead to the Week 7 games, and we start off with a great one for this segment. Another divisional rivalry, Chargers at Chiefs. Chargers, Brian, coming off a tough loss against Dallas, a game that they could have had, didn't quite get there in the end. Chiefs, on the other hand, although we've questioned the way the offense is functioning, and interesting to see that they've added McCole Hardman back into the fold after trade with the Jets, because that wide receiver core just hasn't been getting it done. But they've won 5 on the spin since losing to the Lions. They're finding ways to get it done, and they're not playing anywhere near their best. In some ways, not too far away from where they were this time last season.
As the band is getting back together, I think Frank Clark is due to sign tomorrow as well. Having been released from the Broncos there last week. It's a bit of a strange one. McCall Hardman was always a player that I liked, and he was always on the periphery. And he leaves in free agency, he quickly returns. And sometimes you go away and you quickly realize what you had, and these guys are getting back. Just in terms of this game, sums Brandon Staley for me over the course of the last few years, because if you look how well the Chargers have played against the Chiefs over the course of the last few years, they're always in the game. They beat them there a couple of years ago in week 3. I think me and Colin were in Belfast that night at a meetup party to watch that game. And they've always played them tough. And I think in the reverse game in SoFi, there was 3 opportunities to take field goals and they would have been pulled away. They ended up losing in overtime. I think they lost in overtime last year. They have a knack of hanging around in these games. But I haven't watched the game on Monday. I mean, Herbert clearly doesn't look right now. Again, look, he's had a few days to get ready for this one. I think Williams obviously been out. Keenan Allen has become the forefront of the team, and Colin rightly called it out. He's a guy, at the back end of his career. I think Chiefs right now, Chiefs are on a good run, but a lot of it's down to how well Spagnuolo has this defense playing, because they're not really lighting up on offense, with all due respect. But in this instance, I can't get away. I'd be surprised if anybody's going to Chargers, guys, to be honest. Unless they see a big shock on with the Chiefs in this one. I think Chiefs will see this one as a big opportunity, bearing in mind that Chargers lost on Monday, to really pull away and cement this division, which, to be honest, it was obviously probably something that we knew was coming anyway. But to have this division potentially wrapped up as early as winning against the Chargers in October, it's a big game for them.
Yeah,
Chiefs.
same as you say, Brian. Chargers always do show up against the Chiefs, in fairness to them, but I just don't know if they're going to have what it takes to get over the line here. That Chiefs defense, as you say, we've kind of slept on them a little bit, but they have one of the best secondaries in the league. Everybody shown up strong there. L'Jarius Sneed, obviously the main man. McDuffie's been playing really well. Chris Jones has been a monster. The pass rush has been there when they've needed. Spags is so clever at the way he uses pressure and simulated pressure, and they've been really impressive on that side of the ball. I just think the Chargers, again, without Mike Williams and with the running game not looking anything like it did last year, the times that Kellen Moore offense has really showed up. And Colin, you mentioned it in the show on Tuesday, that amazing game Herbert had where he was 40 of 45 or whatever it was. It's never been done in the history of the NFL for somebody to throw that many passes and to throw them at such a high completion rate. He is carrying an injury, there's no doubt about it, and he wasn't quite at his Justin Herbert best in that game against Dallas at the weekend, but he gives them a chance in every single game. I still see it being Kansas City. I don't know if you see it any differently.
This to me it's essentially it's steamed ham, and because the Chiefs make a mess of things, but they find a way to do it, and ultimately you think the house is on fire, then you're told it's the Northern Lights, and they seem like an odd fellow, but they steam a good ham because they have Patrick Mahomes and they have Andy Reid, and that is ultimately what matters in the end. They deliberately, like, they don't go out of their way to really put the foot down at this part of the season. And the fact that their defense is as good as it is this early and as young it is, I think will be very pleasing. But we've seen the Chargers get wins against the Chiefs in the early part of the season previously. So I'm not ruling it out. But I think that the Chargers have been saved from themselves by some terrible decisions by other teams. They got away with it against the Vikings. There's no way they should have won that game. I don't think the Chiefs will do that to them. I think it could well be a close game, but I think that we are going. I think it's the end. Like, it's not if Brandon Staley gets fired, it's when Brandon Staley gets fired. I think they're circling the drain at this point under his tutelage. And yeah, it's the Chiefs for me. If the Chargers win it, it's the sting of a dying steak.
Colin, keep rolling for your Broncos, who host the Packers this weekend. Some similarities there between the two teams, both for this game, of course, coming off a period of rest and reflection, and both have needed it for different reasons. Both of them have also made it a habit, an unfortunate habit this season, of starting games really, really slowly. This could end up being 0-0 at halftime, and then we'll see what happens in the second half, the way both of these teams have played. Is it one where the Broncos can make a home stand when Packers look a little bit deflated after their pre-bye loss? Or do you think Green Bay gets it back, and that Matt LaFleur, with time to prepare, has cooked up something special?
What a game. When the weight of the world has got you down and you want to end your life, bills to pay, a dead-end job, and problems with the wife. But don't throw in the towel, because there's a place right down the block where you can drink your misery away. Flaming Moe's. Well, Broncos fans need to find Flaming Moe's, because things are not good. Randy Gregory, they got rid of, and he ultimately, it was a disastrous free agent acquisition. Frank Clark paid $1.6 million to leave Denver. He handed back the money. He said, take it. I want to leave. I'm done. I don't want to be here. Jerry Jeudy, is fighting with all the former players that he can possibly find. And the QB collective continue to take shots at Sean Payton. If the Packers, this should absolutely be a get-right game for the Packers. I think they'll be kicking themselves with what happened against the Raiders. But Matt LaFleur has been very tetchy. I think there is pressure there, despite the fact that they came into the season knowing it was going to be a transition year, knowing it was going to be up and down. But he has found it to be very, very frustrating. The Packers should win this, but if the Broncos are able to drag them down to their level, then they can remain. Like, the Broncos can certainly be a Buster Douglas type who can just, pull out a punch. If you are good offensively, you will score points against this Broncos defense. That's the reality of it. But if you allow the Broncos to hang around, there is no reason that Russ can't throw a moonball to Mims and get the Broncos back into it. I'm going to say the Packers should win it at this point, but equally, I think a lot is going to depend on the injury reports as we get closer to kickoff.
Yeah, and one significant player who may potentially be recovering from injury is Aaron Jones for the Packers. Brian, how do you think that might affect the outcome if he shows up?
Before I go ahead, was that a Packers pick or a Broncos pick? You kind of left it. You're kind of like hanging the door, leaving the door ajar there.
I'm waiting on the injury report, because as Connor has just said, if Aaron Jones is fit, that makes an enormous difference. The Broncos are missing a few guys, and so somebody like Justin Simmons, who's on the injury report, who a lot of trade talk around Justin Simmons, maybe that hip injury mightn't allow Justin to play this week.
There's an asterisk there, Connor. James Robinson is signed for the Packers this week, which I found a little bit surprising. It's surprising in the sense that no one has given him another opportunity in the league, because he was signed with the Patriots and the Jets, and then he was signed with the Giants in the offseason, late in the offseason, and again released before the season. I don't know what's happened, because last year he was running touchdowns in from 80 yards against the Chargers for the Jags. But it's interesting that they've obviously recognised with the Aaron Jones injury over the course of the season, and they're not getting enough from A.J. Dillon. If you look at A.J. Dillon's numbers compared to last year, I know he's a bit of a bell cow type of running back as opposed to, getting out on the perimeter and really beating the man, but they're not getting what they got out of him last year. Now, I suppose you could argue that it was kind of convenient and reflective that they had the 1-2 punch with Jones there, but it hasn't been materialized. I think you said a couple of weeks ago, Connor, you were saying, if you take out the actual victories and actually look at the numbers in which the Packers have had offensively, it hasn't been that good. It really hasn't. And obviously we saw against, and it's masked by a 4-quarter comeback against the Saints and various different other players getting good days. And obviously the Bears game on week 1. I'm going to go with the Broncos in this one. I think, they have to find a way at some stage to navigate the victory at home in these games. They keep finding ways to lose. They're losing tight games at home. At some stage, you'd have to think they find a way to get over the hump and win a game. And I think the Jordan Love period, it remains a little bit iffy, and the struggles slightly continue. I'll go with the Broncos. Colin has Denver. Right, whip off that G, change the end to an E, and you'll have never. And say never give up on your Broncos, Colin. Broncos to win their first home game on Sunday.
Yeah, I'm going to go Green Bay in this one, but just about. And the fact that you'd be so doubtful about the Packers taking care of business against this Broncos team, I think kind of says a lot about where they are. At the start of the season, I thought they'd be a half-decent shout for a wild card. A lot of that depended, obviously, on what we saw from Jordan Love, and we hadn't seen an awful lot to make a definitive judgment before this season. And to be fair to him, we've still only seen a handful of games with him as starter. But to your point, Brian, they've only really played in spurts. They had that first game against Chicago, which, every game is a get right game against Chicago for most teams these days, and they took advantage of what was on offer. And they had that furious comeback against the Saints where Love was sensational in the fourth quarter, albeit that he hadn't done much up to that point. He had that 3 interception game before the bye, which, there were 3 bad interceptions as well. And a lot of people then going back and questioning, Jesus, is he really the guy that we hoped he would be? He's obviously a mobile player as well, a mobile quarterback. They haven't necessarily unleashed him on the ground in the way that they might, in the way that, obviously Matt LaFleur hasn't had to do that with Rodgers, hadn't had the option. So maybe that's something they will have cooked up while they've got the time off. I think if Jones is fit, I feel a lot more confident about picking Green Bay in this one. But even as it is, I think they'll probably be enough to get out of Denver with a win. A Sunday Night Football, and we have a particularly tasty looking tie between the Dolphins and the Eagles column. Eagles coming off a loss. Micah Parsons has a podcast. Everybody has a flipping podcast these days, but Micah Parsons pouring some scorn on the Eagles, saying that Jalen Hurts should be getting more heat in the way that Dak Prescott gets heat, and why is it always the Cowboys who get dumped on when they lose, and the Eagles had this bad loss, and why aren't people getting on their back? Probably because they've won a Super Bowl within living memory, and they went to a Super Bowl last year, and Jalen Hurts had one of the all-time great Super Bowl performances, and was maybe slightly unfortunate, to put it mildly, that he didn't run away with both the Lombardi and the MVP. But that all aside, Colin, how do you see this one shaping out? It's 2 very exciting offenses and two very exciting defenses as well. It looks like Jalen Ramsey might even be back for this one, just to add a little bit of extra spice into the mix.
Yeah, I suppose we're Micah Parsons noting he has a podcast. Not a podcast is very meta, but it's been an interesting couple of weeks on his podcast, because he was very upset at George Kittle, who. I thought what Kittle did was kind of exactly what we want. We want, because so much in the NFL, you are playing for the contract, right? A lot of the time, rather than the team. But Kittle actually brought it back to, the way that it used to be. Like for people who are our age and get to, look back, and for younger fans, check out especially how the NFL used to be in the late 80s and early 90s, and the Cowboys and the Giants and Washington and the 49ers. I mean, these teams absolutely tried to take each other's heads off at every given opportunity. So he's having a whinge about that one week, and then he's throwing shade at Jalen Hurts the following week. And I think you've pointed out the reasons why the Cowboys get a much more difficult time. There's also the fact their owner has 2, not 1, but 2 radio shows that he does every week. This is an interesting one, because we have seen, we've seen the Dolphins be incredibly exciting this year at times, but also against the Bills, we saw them have, a real wobble. I think, though, that, this feels maybe a little bit like the Mr. Plow episode. And I think different people will have different opinions as to who is Homer and who is Barney in this instance. In terms of both like Howie and the Dolphins like to get shiny new things to bring them in, and they both make trades. I just think that the reason, I suppose, one of the reasons the Bills were able to do what they did against the Dolphins was the linebackers and Milano. I mean, Milano was absolutely exceptional. I don't think that the Eagles have a linebacker like that. I just don't think things are right now. I think the Eagles are struggling. I think they'll be fine. I don't think they'll be last year's team, but I think they will be fine. But I think the Dolphins are the more informed team. And for that reason, I'm going to say that I think the Dolphins will get the victory in this.
Yeah, I flip-flopped on this one myself, but you've hit on something that I think is actually going to be key to this game, which is if the Eagles have a weakness on defense, it's in that linebacker core. It's a across the middle, which coincidentally is where Mike McDaniel cooks up a lot of his best plays. You know, he gets those crossers. He has that frightening pace where they send Tyreek streaking across diagonally, you know, finding that soft spot and then just tearing up the field, you know, getting huge numbers of yards after the catch. They don't have a Matt Milano, and that is the soft center. You know, they do so much else right, but if there is a way to attack them, it's there. I think the Dolphins are going to throw everything at them in that sense. And the Eagles, although they've been taking care of business most weeks, they haven't been playing out of their skin. I think Shane Steichen has been a huge loss. It's not quite working on offense. You know, they brought in Julio Jones. Like, I don't know how much that's going to do for you, but it would slightly concern me that they feel the need to even do that. We've seen AJ Brown, you know, light it up from time to time, but Devonta Smith hasn't been at the same level that he was. You know, bringing in Swift hasn't necessarily clicked in the way that you thought it might do. Jalen Hurts has carried the team at times, and he's looked sensational both with ball in hand and when he's had to take off and run. But I see this one going Miami's way. I have to say, I think you know, it's a tough place to go and win, but I think they're in the right position. They got the right momentum, and I can see them getting it done in this game. Brian, how does it go for you?
It's dangerous when we're all on the same team, isn't it? But I didn't think, you said earlier on, Conor, I didn't think this would go in the direction it did in terms of the Ravens-Lions game. I'm the same. I'm with the Dolphins, and it makes me nervous to pick them against an Eagles team that will obviously want to get back on track after last week. But I just think, like, as good as the Dolphins have been, and don't get me wrong, they've been fantastic and they've been a joy to watch, they haven't put that marker down in terms of really going and beating a team. Now, you could argue if they do win this game, people say, well, it's not the Eagles of old, it's not the Eagles of last year in terms of how they're playing both offensively and defensively. But I just feel like they need to get that kind of win. They need to beat a team who people have expectations to be in the Super Bowl. So to come up short against the Bills, well, when I say the Bills coming short, they were well beaten in that game. And I just think this one is one they really need to have. In my opinion, I think the Eagles can survive a loss here and still find themselves in the number one seed come the end of the season. And you've mentioned so many different concerns there. Like, there's a bit of a doubt right now over how well the secondary are playing for the Eagles. We saw what the Commanders were able to do in their last home game. They went up and down the field on them for large parts. They lost out, ultimately in overtime, but it was a high scoring game. There's been numerous high scoring games, and even we saw Patriots, early on in the season with their struggles do a number on that secondary. It's not clicking at the level we saw last year. Injury concerns there, so I think if any team can benefit from that, it's Miami, and it's a tester for Miami. It's a Sunday night game, prime time. The crowd will be up for it in Philadelphia. Can't do a handle it. I'll go Dolphins. I think Dolphins get away from this game with a win.
All right. We've Monday Night Football. Sorry, Colin, have you weighed in on Dolphins Eagles? I've lost my place here.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
We're all going Dolphins.
We can move on to. We're all going Miami. We'll move on to Monday night. So and see
which is great news. Great news. If you're an Eagles fan listening to this is good news. And bad news. Sorry, Keith Kelleher.
Put the house on Philly.
Commanders. We all buy Commanders, so that's good news for the Giants on Sunday.
Right, Monday Night Football is Niners at Vikings. I'll start off here rather than waiting for someone else to pick before I weigh in, which is my usual trick. But this one's another one of those games that you feel is going to be defined by who's fit and who's not, and how much their injuries have taken out of them. The Christian McCaffrey injury picked up last week against the Browns for the 49ers doesn't look as serious as previously thought. Deebo Samuel similarly looks like he'll bounce back, and Trent Williams also, although that looked a nasty enough ankle injury, seems to be okay. How okay all three of them are is the key to the game for me. You still would think probably Williams is arguably the biggest loss of the three of them if he's not at full power, or if he does drop out of the game for whatever reason. But you still would think the Vikings down Jefferson are going to struggle to contain San Francisco, who'll want to bounce back strongly after that Browns game. And for all, that we talked about the fact that Cleveland did a number on them, 49ers still should have won that game. And in a normal circumstance, they would. It's a 41-yard field goal that they'd put themselves in position to kick. You might argue the toss with Shanahan as to whether he reverted to type, as he oddly does for a coach who sends out such explosive offense. He can be quite conservative at times, and it's been a criticism of his over the years that maybe they had the opportunity to go for the touchdown, or maybe they could have advanced the ball a little bit further and turned it into a chip shot. 41 yards, you would argue, for a lot of field goal kickers these days is a chip shot, and Jake Moody would very much want that one back. As we talked about on our Tuesday show, he's been a little bit shaky, but I don't think it's going to come down to a field goal game here. I still think the 49ers would see this as a game which they can handle, and I see them bouncing back against Minnesota. Colin, is it Vikings or 49ers for you?
For me, I mean, this is Homer at the bat, because the 49ers are stacked, and I think we could potentially do an episode in and of itself as to drawing the parallels as to who is Strawberry and who is Canseco and others from this 49ers roster. But the Vikings are fun, and I saw actually this week that the Vikings EPA is far better this year, but obviously the results haven't gone their way, and that's what I was saying. I think this could be a better team with a worse record. Nothing has gone right for them, and they're kind of in this weird space now where they know that Kirk Cousins is likely gone. Justin Jefferson is out. It's probably about trying to find out who are the kind of foundational pieces that you are going to look to build on, because very likely you are drafting in a young QB in there. I think the 49ers should get back to winning ways. The Vikings have been fun on offense, but Brian Flores has them playing like maniacs, like the way they're blitzing. But they don't yet have the type of players that he needs. I think their defense will be improved again next year, but I just don't think they will be able to live with this Niners team. And I think the Niners will have some guys back, and Shanahan will be able to scheme it up. I mean, they lost last week against a Browns defense that have been absolutely incredible.
Yeah, Brian, as Colin was saying, Flores sent the house after Fields early and often last week. We saw what the pressure getting home against Brock Purdy did to San Francisco's offense last week. At the same time, though, we said the Niners probably should have won that game. The Vikings could easily have lost the game they played against the Bears, which is not a great place to be. Do you see them being able to make a homestand against this 49ers team and correct some of the issues that have held them back offensively, not least the ball security issues?
No. Johnny Giles had that old saying, and you see it every time, which we can only judge the game on its merits. Well, if you judge the last weekend on its merits, you take the Bears Vikings game. Like, you're talking about sending the house and getting to Justin Fields. I think the game was 6-all at half time, and it took late in the third quarter before the Vikings. And even with that, the Bears still have opportunities towards the end. I know every game is very different in the NFL from one week to the next, but you can only judge on what you saw last week. And yeah, you've nailed it. Like, we're bigging up the Browns defense for a fantastic performance, but yeah, there was 2 missed field goals in that game. And you talk about the conservative piece at the end. They could have went on and potentially pushed on for another opportunity to make it even more of a gimme on the field goal. It wasn't debated. They lost the game. The Browns get out, but the 49ers, will certainly be ready for this one. And I think, Monday Night Football, I don't think the Vikings crowd strikes me, and I've read it before, they quickly lose interest in games where it's not going well. It doesn't strike me as the kind of place you go in. It's quite daunting. I think if the Niners get up early, the crowd will lose interest. I think this could be one of the easier Monday Night Football games for the Niners. I think they'll rebound, and they'll rebound in a manner which is expecting of a team that we think will be in the championship game come late January.
All right, there you have it. That is it for the Monday night game, and indeed for our Week 7 preview. We thank everyone who tuned in on YouTube Live, and we ask anyone who's listening back to us on podcast, will you please rate, review, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. It makes a huge difference in terms of helping others to find us. And obviously, let's face it, it's a little bit of an ego boost as well. And we could all do with that on a wet Thursday evening with all of our teams languishing at or near the bottom of their respective divisions. Hope springs eternal, though, in the NFL, and we hope for better things this weekend.